Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast we hope to get on the same page. Hello and welcome to On the Same Page. I'm one of your co-hosts, Seamus, and with me as always is Blake. How are you, my good sir?
I am flustered. We are fitting this podcast in a tight schedule because Seamus is going to Melbourne this morning, Australia time, and I have just finished work Berlin time. I thought I had an extra hour, and
I got the times wrong.
Well, maybe, I don't know. I think it's a daylight savings thing.
Let's just
blame that. Just blame that.
Blame anything else.
There's no blame actually to go around. It doesn't matter because, I mean, this whole podcast's about winging it a bit. But, you know, I think we're also flying a bit. So,
absolutely.
Killing it. This is episode 5. No, you get back to you.
Oh, well, I was going to say, episode 5. Today we're going to be talking about underrated books. But first, we've received our first email.
Oh, shit.
So, they've got a question.
Oh,
I'll read it out.
I can't believe this.
Dear Seamus and Blake, Seamus spelt with a H, so not off to a great start there. Yeah. So far I'm loving the podcast and I'm keen to listen to more episodes, so please release them. Well, we're recording them, so thank you. I had a question. You did an episode on classics. What do you define as a classics? Love the podcast. Thanks, Bayer.
Interesting.
So this could be a whole episode in itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and we probably should do an episode on this because it is a question which certainly in academia and in literary studies gets argued about a lot. And I think also culturally, politically gets talked about a lot, the Western canon and who gets to be in it, all these kind of things. I think it's more or less perspective. From one point of view, Roland Barthes said that literature is whatever gets taught, you know, whatever's in the schools, whatever's in the universities, that's what becomes literature with a capital L, that's what becomes canon. I more or less think literature is whatever gets read. Literature is whatever people need, and it's not determined, and certainly what the last 100 years or more has shown, it's certainly not determined by any race or class or gender or sexuality. Clearly, literature is dominated by minorities, by all types of people who have been under pressure, and that's how they've let it out through extremely acute and articulate expression. And you know, obviously, for a long time, also literature requires a great amount of privilege in a way. It requires time, solitude, time to read, time to write. And so, you know, for a long time, it was just, you know, rich white dudes who had time to sit in their study and people to do all their labor for them.
Yep.
So, yeah, I don't know. I guess it's what lasts. Time decides the canon. Time decides what classics are. And that's at least how I see it. You know, some things, which we'll talk about today, are underrated or perhaps not valued and thought about as classics, but you know, we probably think they're classics and other people do. So it's subjective, but I think in general, a classic should, you hope, address larger things. You know, I think in another episode in that very episode, you're talking about a classic that you didn't quite rate being Crime and Punishment. And one of the classics I did rate in that episode was The Brothers Karamazov. And the difference between those two kind of is Crime and Punishment talks about two things, crime and punishment. Brothers Karamazov talks about everything. And that's kind of the difference between the two. You really have to try and get to a lot more places because, you know, the novel gives you that space. It gives you that depth of perspective. It gives you that depth of experience of a life, which is an accumulation of experiences and feelings and whatnot. So you really want to try and reach for universality. And if something's too singular, I don't really think it lasts that long because people can find it elsewhere. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I'd probably more or less basically agree with that. that it has to transcend time. But I think there are classics that come out that are probably instant classics and considered instant classics, and that I almost feel like we're holding on to now out of just sort of stubbornness, I guess. I've got two sort of that come to mind for me that I read that I don't really rate at all. Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man and Catcher in the Rye. I think they're a bit too... Portrait of an Artist is a bit too modernistic and is just stuck in modernist styles, and therefore can't break free compared to some of the other writers in that period. I don't know if, because I haven't read Ulysses, if that's sort of similar. But then I've read The Dubliners, and I love that. I think that's a classic, and that'll definitely transcend time. And then Catcher in the Rye, similarly, I think was groundbreaking at the time and became an instant classic. But now that we've moved on from it a bit, we can look back and think it's not as great. I mean, it's great because it's the first of its kind to do what it did. But now it's not that exciting to read for anyone new coming to the book. If you're from that time period and you understand what's going on in literature and in the world, then it makes sense why it's a classic. But if you don't understand that, the whole book sort of is lost on you, and I think that's important. And then on the other hand, you got classics like, of course, Moby Dick, that, 2,000 copies in the first 40 years in his lifetime, and then hundreds of thousands, millions now. So classics can be underappreciated and overappreciated, I think.
Certainly. And I think as well as, it's time in a large, it's the deep time of literature of Moby Dick, and there's also the individual reader time, which is when you come to it and what your perspective is. And for me, both of those books you just mentioned, I read at a much younger age. I read Catcher in the Rye when I must have been 14 at school in Washington, D.C., and I was there as an exchange student, and a really good English teacher I had, actually. But the family I lived with I came in like halfway through a term, and they were reading Catcher in the Rye, and I was like, I don't need to catch up on this. They're about to finish it. And they're like, no, you have to read this. It's an American classic. And so I kind of read Catcher in the Rye, not knowing anything about it or Salinger.
Is this the family or the school making you read it?
Well, it was being read in my class, but there was like maybe 2 weeks to go of that book. And they were like, no, like, don't wait until whatever the next book, maybe we're reading Gatsby or something next. But they were like, no, you have to read this. This is the American classic. This is the book that every kid in America reads when they're at school. And so I was like, all right, and yeah, I mean, I don't remember a thing from it now. And at the time, I remember being fairly confused by it, and more just kind of fascinated by their devotion to it, because I didn't really see anything like that in Australia. No one was pushing Voss on me or pushing, like, I don't know, anyone on me in Australian schools. So I was like, why are they so being, fascinated by this book, and why are they treating it like it's such a Bible for them? But yeah, I mean, I guess it didn't get me time. And the same, but then again with Portrait of the Artist, I think I must have read that at the right time, because it did hit me in the right spot. It tickled an itch, and it just seemed to, you need to, sometimes a book just falls into place. And for me, that was Portrait of the Artist, but I can totally see how someone at a different age, if someone was like 25, 45, 65 coming to Portrait of the Artist, they definitely wouldn't see it as a 15-year-old, 17-year-old, or, so I think that also plays into it.
I was 26, I think. So, quite old.
No longer a young man.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't stack up.
Yeah. All right, well, shall we move on then?
Well, yeah, covered that. Thanks for the email.
Tick. That's all right.
Glad to know someone's listening. I hope that wasn't a bot. If it was a bot, I guess that's a fairly good question. And yeah, keep it coming, Poots. And that's Putin chiming in there on our feed. Thanks, Poots, mate. Keep them bots coming.
We appreciate it. We love the love.
Yeah.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. Russia, I love your stuff.
We've done nothing but trash Anna Karenina and Crime and Punishment, but yes.
Yeah. I might even do a bit more of that today. So. Okay. And our next section we're calling the Inner Shelf. Now, this is a segment in which we're going to talk about an experience from daily life in which we find ourselves browsing our inner shelves, that is, the books we carry around with us in our heads, in our hearts, and how they bleed into our experience. If you're on a train and you see something, if you think of a line, if you think of a character, just these ways that, not only when you come and read a book do you place your experience on it, but vice versa. It's affective and effective. And, nobody reads in a vacuum. It's not like Christopher Nolan's Interstellar where he's in the vacuum and there's a bookshelf. I mean, he can't quite get to the books, can he? So maybe Christopher Nolan was onto something. But
yeah, perhaps.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Dude's onto a few things. Perhaps too many. If you've seen Tenet, it's like maybe take a step back, Christopher.
Yeah,
you're onto too
that was
many
a bit
things.
Much. Yep.
Yeah. But also pretty good film.
Yeah.
And
love it.
But yeah, speaking of Russians, Kenneth Branagh always plays a if he was if Kenneth Branagh could be cast as Idi Amin and he would give him a Russian accent. He's like, the guy's evil? Okay, I play a Russian. It's like, chill out, Kenneth Branagh.
So
anyway,
true.
he loves it. But, good for him. Did a pretty good Hamlet. So, Inner Shelf. Have you prepared anything for today? Do you have any experiences this week, or are you pulling it from?
Well, yeah, my experience came this week. I'm not sure if this will cover your vision for perhaps this section, but we'll give it a go. We'll see what happens. So I was in the supermarket this week listening to an audiobook, and it was funny because when I entered the supermarket, I thought back to last week's episode, Non-Fiction, when you said supermarkets are one of the most colourful and one of the most dull places. And I was just kind of like, yeah, it is pretty dull in here. But then, weirdly by chance, I was listening to an audiobook called Poison for Breakfast by Lemony Snicket. Now, it's quite a recent release. It's only just come out on Audible, and I think only came out in August in general. Out of Lemony Snicket, I've only read the series of Unfortunate Events, but it's it's told in a very Lemony Snicket particular humour kind of roundabout way. It's this sort of, he has breakfast in the morning and then finds a note saying you've just eaten poison. And so the story is him going out in his day and retracing what he bought for breakfast and to see whether they've poisoned him. And it's meant to be this sort of mystery, but it's this thought-provoking philosophy book with his kind of humour. It sort of ends up being something similar to like The Little Prince in terms of meaning. But yeah, he takes the journey, retracing his steps, visiting the source of every item he's eaten. But he had this quote, which is here. As I've said, I prefer a shop which sells one thing to a shop that sells many things. A supermarket, of course, tries to sell everything, and there is always something distrustful about a place so eager to please. And that just made me think, you called them dull, and it all kind of just lined up a bit too perfectly because I was in the supermarket. It's a very short audiobook. It's only like 3 hours. I would recommend. The ending is so incredibly beautiful and deep that really knocks you for six. It's touching. And I think the beauty of Mr. Snicket is that he can write something so easily passed along as a joke and comedy, but somehow manages to bring it back to something humane and beautiful. I guess that's just a testament to his skill as a writer and a storyteller. I got two more quotes. I might read them just to give you
Sure.
Little taster. So this is some of his dry humor. Zeno was an ancient Greek philosopher who ended up being tortured by people who didn't like his ideas. Nowadays, philosophers are hardly ever tortured because most people ignore them completely. So I love that one. But then he has his way of just going roundabouts but still making it incredibly meaningful. Telling yourself that something does not matter is one of the loneliest things you can do, because you only say it, of course, about things that matter very much, but often, and this is the lonely part, they only matter to you. So I'm not sure if you've actually read any Lemony Snicket.
No, I've never read. My sister definitely read all the series of Unfortunate Events books when I was young, so I remember seeing the books, and then I don't know why I never approached them. But and I've seen, I think, the Jim Carrey, like, I haven't actually seen the film, but I've seen that he did something. So I kind of get that he's a very eccentric character. I really don't know more than that. But I really like the tone of some of those, so I might might dip in and see what it's all about. But I like that. I mean, the supermarket's an interesting one because it is dull and yet colourful, but the eager to please is the perfect thing, because the marketing of the colors is so, I don't know, it's meretricious. It's flashy, but there's nothing inside it. I remember, I had if you grew up in and around Sydney, or maybe it's a thing elsewhere, but we had this thing called the Easter Show. And you go to the Easter show, and you know, all the different companies and stuff have little stalls, and you get show bags, which are just kind of literally like shiny plastic bags full of like chocolate bars or furry toys or just crap. And then there's heaps of shit inside. And I remember when I was really young, I had a rugby coach, a great guy, but he was known for, you know, telling quite wild stories, and his nicknames were Showbags. And as a young kid, I asked, why is he called Showbags? And some other coach said, because he's shiny on the outside and shit in the inside.
Yes.
And that's the supermarket. But then there's also, I mean, the mundane music. There's a lot of, it's not as bad as like Starbucks music, which is really anodyne. But supermarket music, my partner Samira gets angry at me because I sing in the cinema. I sing not in the cinema. That would be terrible. I sing in the supermarket.
I'd get angry at you for that as well.
Yeah, no, certainly not. No, but something about the weird kind of vacuity of the place. I try to fill it somehow with something, and so I try to sing along with things. But yeah, I don't know. I also sometimes, I mean, it's this little adventure you take in, I don't know, urban life to go and get things from the shop, where previously you would have found food by some other purpose. Now you just kind of go to this, I don't know, very sanitized situation, and it can be enjoyable because, like you said, you can go with an audiobook, you can go with music, you can go to a thing. It's just more time to spend by yourself.
Yep. I think it can also be enjoyable if you're doing something like visiting a country for the first time, and you get to see basically everything that's popular in one location. Yeah.
So, and if you go to those supermarkets, depending on the supermarket, they just have like the random Polish aisle or the random like whatever country aisle, and you go down there like it's a little, I'm too poor to travel, but I can go to the Polish aisle. Yeah, I can see what they're getting up to. And there's always some very odd delicacies that you can be like, oh, people are eating this. But yeah, that's a good one. I like that. Lemony Snicket, snippeting his way into everyday life. I didn't have one organised. That was partly why I was flustered when I started. So I just kind of quickly was thinking while I was setting up the microphone to a kind of any time where literature has been really vivid in my life. And the first thing that came to mind, I was just thinking of Inner Shelf, and then it just got me thinking about shelf life. And I was like, okay, what's got the longest shelf life for me in terms of literature? What's been the thing that's really stayed with me the longest, that seems to come to me the most? And in terms of the longest and the writer that's never lost momentum, I guess, in my life, that's always stayed, parallel if we were going along the highway of time together, is W.H. Auden. the poet W.H. Auden. And I definitely remember a time when I was living and working in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and I used to get the bus from where I was living in Congreso, which is like right near the Congressional Building in the center of Buenos Aires, out to Palermo, which is quite a hipster cool neighborhood, where I worked in a very bougie private cocktail bar. You had to be a member to get in, and I was just in there. It must be very nice. And I was just in there shaking cocktails, and there's a pool, and it's all private and just very socialites hanging out and whatnot. I was very much an odd one out. I had a big giant beard at the time, and I'd just kind of been backpacking through Latin America for like a year. So
I just saw a picture of you on Facebook this week with your beard.
Oh yeah, someone reposted a photo. Zoe posted a photo of a selfie we got with a llama in Peru. I mean, I still can't believe that llama said yes. We were like, sir, can you, would you take a selfie with us? And nailed it. Yeah, crazy. Nice little blast from the past. But I used to have to get this bus. I remember it was the number 12 and right outside the Congressional Building. So the Congressional Building's at one end, and then there's the famous Plaza de Mayo, which runs all the way down to Casa Rosa, the pink house where the president is. And it's this big road goes in between lots of nice cafes and, like the hairdresser where Pope Francis used to get his haircut. I don't know why he had a haircut. He's got like 4 hairs, but whatever. Boar hairs used to hang out nearby and the whole crew. But on this bus, for some reason, for months, I just decided to kind of pick a poem from Auden every day and then kind of memorize it to the point where I'd memorize like huge swathes of Auden just because it was a routine I'd got into.
Yeah.
And the one which I think I always think about it has the longest shelf life is this one. So I'm just going to read it. It's called The More Loving One. Looking up at the stars, I know quite well that for all they care, I can go to hell. But on earth indifference is the least we have to dread from man or beast. How should we like it were stars to burn with a passion for us we could not return? If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. Admirer as I think I am, of stars that do not give a damn, I cannot, now I see them, say I missed one terribly all day. Were all the stars to disappear or die, I should learn to look at an empty sky and feel its total dark sublime, though this might take me a little time. And
that was lovely.
Lovely. It's a lovely, one of my favourite Auden poems. And I love such great capacity of the line. If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. I think it's the most balanced line in poetry. It's wonderful. But it's strange that I don't know why at the time I was so into Auden, because Auden in a way is such a northern poet and bright. Buenos Aires, it's burning hot every day. I remember it always being the middle of summer and sweating my ass off on this bus and trying to get a seat, and then in my head just kind of like reciting stanzas of Auden poems. And I don't know. It's an odd time for literature to bleed in, but I guess it was trying to tell me something. And you can guess if you listen to that poem.
Well, you said you tried to remember all of them. You tried a new one every day. Can you remember many of them?
I mean, I can remember lots of them, but certainly not all of them. I mean, Auden wrote a lot. And but I can certainly think of other ones. What's a good short one I can think of? I loved the one he wrote called is it called The Ogre? No, it's called August 1968. At the end of nowhere near. It's called August 1968. I'll have to go from memory because I've got my big collected Auden, which I always carry around.
Oh yeah, that's a chunky book. You could not remember all that. If you could, I'd be very impressed.
No. Oh, and it's so mixed up. I mean, it's not all verse. He wrote lots of different things, but lots of different styles. That was really his greatness as a poet, was that he was a master of every technique. but when he was late in life, he was living in Austria in a small town, and in August 1968, if any modern historians are listening, that was the month when the Red Army rolled into Czechoslovakia, and a democratically socialist government was overthrown by the Soviets. And he wrote this poem called August 1968, where he personified basically the Red Army, the Soviet Union, as an ogre. And from memory it goes, "The ogre does what ogres can, deeds quite impossible for man. But one prize is beyond his reach. The ogre cannot master speech. About a subjugated plain, amongst the desperate and the slain, the ogre stalks with hands on hips, while drivel gushes from his lips."
So I've never read any W.H. Auden, but this is sounding very nice.
Yeah, a marvelous poet, and I think he has a bit of a rejuvenation in the 90s. Richard Curtis used one of his poems in Four Weddings and a Funeral, in the eponymous funeral scene. I think it was the first time in a major motion picture where a poem was read in full. Like lots of other times, sections of a poem had been read. But who's is Matthew Arnold the Scottish actor? I can't remember his name. He does.
Yeah, it's been so long now.
That scene where he does "Stop All the Clocks," which I think is the one poem that, if people know an Auden poem, they know "Stop All the Clocks." Cut off the telephone, give the dog a juicy bone, and then it finishes. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever, but I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood, for nothing now can ever come to any good. I don't know why I said it like it was a rousing song. It's a tragic,
I know our listeners
poem.
Can't see you thrusting your fist in the air through that.
Yeah.
Liberating the people or something.
I got into it. Again, because I was getting confused because I thought I was in the middle of Buenos Aires.
Liberty and death.
And you have to be gesturing and expressive, otherwise the Argentine don't know what's going on. The porteños are like, "What?"
That was lovely.
For some reason, the porteños speak a lot of French. I don't get it, but they do. Anyway, so that was The Inner Shelf. Since we've got our first email, we should also ask if anyone wants to contribute some of their inner shelf experiences. We'd be glad to hear about it.
Yeah.
I'm always curious about, people out in the world and how literature's involved in their lives. And I don't know about you, but, certainly if I'm on a train or somewhere and I see someone they're reading, I'm always annoyed if they're hiding the cover. I'm like, show me what you're reading. Don't be don't be hiding. Yesterday I was sitting next to a girl who was just at the beginning of Hane Yanagihara's A Little Life.
Oh God,
which is
book.
A big one. One. I read that last year or the year before or something like that, and it's a big one. I mean, we'll probably talk it on this podcast. I didn't disturb her because the Germans don't like that, but I nearly leaned over and was like, good luck.
long way to go.
Yeah, you're going to go through a lot of pain. And that's the book. The book is go through a lot of pain. Yeah. Somehow it's actually weirdly readable, considering how much it makes you suffer. But it's kind of, I guess, one of the beautiful parts of it. But sidetracked, alas, tangential as I am. We are talking today about underrated books, and of course that is a statement in itself. Underration is subjective in a way. Talk about what that means. How did you approach underrated?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. I had a list, but of course I don't know what other people have read and if it's underrated in their lives or if it's just underrated overall. Maybe just the bookshops I've been to haven't had these particular books. So I just kind of went with two books that I hadn't heard of until I'd heard of them. and to this day I haven't seen them in a bookshop. So that's sort of what I went with. My first, you actually recommended to me, is Stoner by John Williams.
Oh, I had a feeling that you were gonna pick this. Good stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. I listened to this book, but I look back on it with this odd sort of sentimentality of beauty. It's incredibly careful and steady novel. It explores the life of William Stoner. He starts off at uni, and then he avoids going to war, and then he goes back to uni as a teacher, as a professor. So it's basically just his academic life. And nothing remarkable really happens in his life, but that's kind of the beauty of it. It doesn't try to be something that it isn't, and that kind of makes it this incredibly humanistic story. I think, though, that the story is almost not enough to sustain the interest, but it is in fact the prose, because the prose is just so clean, it's so measured. You find yourself immersed in this story that is not terribly exciting, but for some reason you're hooked, and that's the prose, that's the language. It's just so good that you barely even notice the story. I have this quote that I'll just read, and then I'll ask you if you shared similar thoughts on it, because I know you've read it. In his extreme youth, Stoner had thought of love as an absolute state of being to which, if one were lucky, one might find access. In his maturity, he had decided it was the heaven of false religion, towards which one ought to gaze with an amused disbelief, a gently familiar contempt, and an embarrassed nostalgia. Now in his middle age, he began to know that it was neither a state of grace nor an illusion. He saw it as a human act of becoming, a condition that was invented and modified moment by moment, and a day by day, and by the will and the intelligence and the heart. And so it's just so clean. It's just so thoughtful. It's so deep. I loved this story, and I've never seen it in a bookshop. I'd never heard of John Williams or Stoner before. I haven't seen him since, so I consider it quite underrated, but very much worth the read or the listen if you want to listen to it, because it had quite a good narration.
Yeah, I love this book as well, and I thought about it in terms of for this episode, because it is, I think, certainly underrated. I read it maybe at the same time as you, or
I think it was very similar. Yeah. Would have been
I
earlier this year.
I had heard of it beforehand as a book that had been recommended me. I at least 2 American literature students, which I think is the kind of main market probably of Stoner.
Probably, yeah.
Which is why I've, kind of young Americans, and they were like, you got to read this book. You like this book. And I did. So I think I like it for some of the same reasons you do. I like it because of its restraint, in terms of how this, not only the prose is given, but the restraint of limitations for a lot of lives, and it's true to life in that way. There's a lot of things that didn't seem open to him, that he didn't feel like he had the choice of doing, and he kind of just followed the little doors that opened to him, and they kind of led into an academic career at a kind of regional university. And it wasn't like he was a top tier performing academic or a real game changer. He kind of stayed in his lane and was just comfortable getting by, and he found the things which helped him get by. But he also had these overtly dramatic things come up. For instance, his relationship with his wife, and his how his wife interfered with his relationship with his daughter, which was really heart-wrenching, and some of the issues he has with students. I also love that it was a campus novel about the professor, and not always about the students.
Yep.
You had a different tone, and yeah, I think it's just a wonderfully. The novel has a great sense of peace to it. I think it has a sense of like early autumn on campus vibe through most of it. That's the type of prose. It does have a trajectory from this young guy on a really kind of frostbitten, hard, poverty-stricken farm who kind of would never dream of being an academic. And he kind of just gradually finds his way. He goes to uni to study agriculture or something, and he's supposed to be, the first person in his family to study
to go to university.
And to kind of like try and improve the farm by learning about crops and whatnot. And then, takes a course on
literature,
Shakespeare or something, and he's just drifts away, and his parents kind of just have to deal with that. He comes to these kind of challenges which may seem small, they're not great challenges. They're not, even there is the literal challenge of, does he go to war? And there's a great scene where three of them are having a conversation, and one of the three friends does go to war. And he chooses not to. He kind of thinks, it's not my fight. I'm more of just like I'm doing what I'm doing here kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he does make courageous decisions. He makes a decision not to do what his family told him. He makes a decision to kind of follow something a bit different. It's not...
Yeah, decisions that are big at the time that...
Yeah,
overall
but I like
just chip away and lead you.
Yeah, but it takes a real great novel to focus on those smaller, courageous acts in a lifetime and how they course through a narrative. And so I think that's why I really liked it. And it was just so well done. The tone was so inch perfect. Really, it was like Glenn McGrath, just line and length all the time. Just line and length. You could just count on him. He was always just hitting the right points as you go along, keeping you going. You really always felt like, a good line was around the corner. Everything was nicely balanced. You're going to come to something. You never felt, this is not going anywhere. You always were just quite happy to be hearing what this guy was up to. Yeah. Even if from the outside, anyone else in the spectrum of the novel would have looked at this guy and thought he was the most boring guy at the whole university or whatever else, just a real career academic, tenured, can't get rid of him, this, etc. But yeah, great book. Love that. Good choice. And I think pretty underrated for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, what was your first underrated book?
Well, I think I've even spoken in a few other episodes about, at least two writers who I think is some of the most rated writers of the 20th century. I think, one was Malcolm Lowry, and The Volcano I thought was a greatly underrated book, but definitely covered that. And the other, Christina Stead, and I talked about For Love Alone. And because Christina Stead's been such a big part of my reading in the last year or two, I think I'm going to focus on what is considered. And actually, it's a book which seems to come up on a lot of, most underrated books lists, which I Googled about an hour ago. Just see what other people were describing as underrated, because, you don't quite know. Because a lot of the things I was like, from my perspective, there's lots of books which I'm so surprised that people don't know about, or even just a writer that people don't know about. And maybe that sounds really snobbish, but I more or less mean it like, oh no, like you should get involved, or this person's this or this person's that. But of course, from the other perspective, you don't know about a writer until someone tells you about them. Then you find them and you read them. I didn't know about Christina Stead until a few years ago. Now I've read a few of her novels, and they're big books, but I'm going to say extremely underrated, because it's ridiculous that she's not, especially since I'm Australian, that I didn't know about this, that we had one of the great, modernist writers of the 20th century, just like chilling in Mossman when she was a kid. All right, cool. But so I've chosen The Man Who Loved Children.
Nice.
Probably her most famous book. I've got my fat ass copy here, which you can see.
Yeah. That's a big one.
It's a biggie. And it certainly scares a lot of people off for that reason. And I think it might also be a book that people give up on because Christina has a penchant to kind of jabber on a bit. But persistence does pay off. I've talked about persistence before in this podcast when it comes to reading. And I think if you trust in a book, sometimes you can get repaid. Sometimes you don't.
No.
And it's taken me a long time to learn that scanning is not a crime. If something's boring you can scan a bit. I used to be like, no, every line,
every
you have
single word. Yeah.
You have to know exactly what's going on in case you miss something. This is not, like a high-end crime drama where if you miss like a sleight of hand from a character that is, it's at the end you're like, oh, what? I didn't even see that happen. Yeah. No, I mean, this is a big family drama book, and hundreds of pages are just providing extra depth to the vices and virtues of characters. And you kind of get it. So you can skip ahead sometimes because, especially in the middle, she drags on. But then she really picks it back up again, and it finishes with a great flourish too. But the end, I thought I would talk about The Men Who Love Children just a little bit because, and I kind of like presaged it earlier by mentioning that I might drag Anna Karenina through the mud again, / push her onto the tracks, because Anna Karenina, like you said, the bit which let you down is that it has the subtitle of a revenge novel, and that it doesn't really fulfill that.
Vengeance is mine, I will repay.
Exactly. And for me, which is probably like parallel to that, is that it begins with one of the great lines in literature, great openings in literature about all happy families are the same, but every unhappy family is unique in their own way, or however Garnett or whoever the translator did it, and then where's the story of the unhappy family? I mean, you kind of don't really get it. I mean, you get bits of it. I think neither of us have read War and Peace, but I think there's a bit more of the unhappy family explored in that, I hear. But you don't really get it. I mean, you get some unhappy people, for sure. I don't know if you get unhappy family.
Yeah, no.
And Christina Stead fulfills that in The Man Who Loved Children. This is the ultimate novel of the unhappy family. It
just one family?
One family, and it's a mess of a family. It was... I mean, firstly, she was going to set it in Sydney, but her publishers, Simon and Schuster, who should forever be ashamed of this, although I do love them as publishers, said that no one knows what the fuck Sydney is. Like, we're not going to can't market a fucking book. And she was living in New York at the time. Can't market a book that's set in Sydney or whatever the hell you say you're from. So you've got to set it somewhere else. World. Yeah, you're not some colonial backwater. I don't know what you're talking about, but shut up, Christina, and set it somewhere real. And so she set it in Washington D.C. And I think this is one of the reasons why it initially got a bit of critical either deafness or not a great response, because I think American critics were like, I don't really know if this is America. And because it's really not. It's and it's the first time Christina, or maybe not the first time, probably maybe the first time, Christina Stead read all sorts of books. She was a great, she wrote books about economics and banking and Marxists and stuff like that, and also just other types of novels. But this is the first novel where she really got into her. This is her story. She was, born in and around Sydney, and her mother died young, and her father remarried and had a bunch of other kids with her stepmom, and that's precisely what happens to Louisa in The Man Who Loved Children. And the Pollitt family, they're called the Pollitts. Sam Pollitt is the head of the family, who's a narcissist child, basically. not only is he the supreme narcissist who has kind of no idea of the emotional realities of the people around them because they're all just pawns in his delusion. That's why he's the man who loves children, because children are innocent. They don't know that you're playing with them.
I see.
You know, and he has, he's always putting on voices. He has this whole idiom, which also doesn't make sense in an American context, because there's whole sections of dialogue which sound like distorted Australian slang.
Yeah.
It's like, why? How would they have got this?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like baby talk and kind of Australian kind of the way we change suffixes and prefixes and introduce animals and stuff into our talk and all this kind of stuff. He uses this crazy vernacular with his kids all the time, this whole secret language, which only the kind of kids understand. And yeah, so he kind of uses them, and his wife absolutely hates him, and that's Henny, and that's a big tension of the novel between them and between Louisa, the first child from the first marriage, who is now she's seeing through her father now. She's getting to her 14, 15, and she's starting to want someone, she's starting to want a father. She's starting to want someone who can take her seriously as a woman, someone who can talk her through things. And Henny, her stepmother, kind of hates her because she represents more, she's not her child. She feels there's all that kind of stuff.
So it's semi-autobiographical a bit.
Very semi-autobiographical, and in a great biography of Christina Stead, it's the writer talks about, who's the writer, I can't remember now, talks about how Christina would sit and be crying as she was writing it, and be having a real emotional turmoil at getting this book out. And it's a big book, and it's amazing. And if you love Stead, if you love Baroque fabulism, she's got such a command of language. She's got such a command of style. She's got such a command of dialogue. Her imagery, vast oceans of riling prose with poetic calms and raging storms. But yes, it goes on a bit too long. But like I said, you can scan, and there's a great quantity of amazing stuff in it. Whole paragraphs just stunning, and sometimes she's just showing off. She's just showing off how good she is at writing. And she was very good, very modernistic, and this book has a lot of very eminent fans. Randall Jarrell, the great American poet, who has actually almost a inner shelf option for me today, because I recently bought the kind of memoirs of Randall Jarrell's wife for like $1 outside a bookstore the other day.
Oh, nice.
So that may be coming up, little teaser. And also Jonathan Franzen wrote a great piece in the New York Review of Books, or maybe the New York Times Magazine, about how underrated this book was, and that it's one of the great books of the 20th century, and that it's a book which, if the people who love it really love it, and the people who need it really need it, and that if there is a large population of those people out there, and this book should find them. So this Sam Pollitt is just this absolute man-child, and I don't know, you get so angry at him, and you get so angry at the way that the different children are treated, and how poor Louise is treated, and she's kind of sent to different extended parts of the family. But it's just an incredible book, incredibly expansive. I hadn't had time to pick out any quotes, but I'm just looking in my book that's in front of me and looking to see which pages are the most marked.
Yep, that's always a good indication.
Because that's I can't remember who said it, but someone said that their yoga was underlining lines, and that's that's kind of my yoga too, or my meditation. I might just give this a bit of a read. This is about Henny, the mother. Oh, and also, of course, the family's dirt poor all the time. Money's always a problem.
Yep.
Sam Pollitt he's a kind of middle rank civil servant. Thinks that he's an intellectual genius. Thinks he has the perfect answers for how the state should be run, how education should be run, how poetry should be written, how children should be raised, how wives should behave, how everything. And there's a big section where he goes to Malaya, I don't know, like Singapore or something for like 6 months, and he has a weird primitivism of the people, and you know, and he just kind of thinks of himself as this great kind of I don't even know, Renaissance man, and he's always speaking poems and talking in this crazy fashion all the time, which gets very very old in a book this length. You know, sometimes at the beginning you're like, oh, he's not that bad, and then you're just like, oh god, this guy is so tedious.
Shut up.
And that it just goes on and on and on. But anyway, this is Henny, you know, and she's an incredibly depressed, frustrated woman, and this is her going downtown. So obviously, you know, this is the transparent substitution of Washington DC for Sydney. As I said earlier, I've spent some time in DC. Them cities aren't alike, okay? They are. I mean, you've got Sydney Harbour and the Potomac. I'm not saying one is better, but they're not very similar. You know, in Sydney Harbour, you know, the Potomac is beautiful, and you know, you will go through Washington and you've got the blossoms, and you've got Lincoln Memorial and Jefferson and the White House and everything, Capitol building. You know, in Sydney, all the great landmarks are natural. You know, the city is an eyesore.
Do you think that probably contributes then to its underratedness?
Oh yeah, I think that's...
People would get confused, Americans get confused, and Australians get confused?
I think so. I mean, I think it was just this... I mean, like I said, when I was in the other episode when I was talking about For Love Alone, when she did set it in Sydney, I was able to... how amazingly she did it. So it's kind of, in one way, one of the great missed opportunities of literature, that her great book... I mean, For Love Alone is brilliant. I mean, I prefer it actually to The Man Who Loved Children, probably because this needed Sydney. This needed to be...
Yeah.
It needed to have its real setting. And it was really forced on DC, which is just not a similar city. I mean, yes, it's divided by a river, divided by a harbour, but really not at all. But here she is. This is Henny going into the downtown to maybe do some shopping with the no money that she has.
Yep.
And I think this is before they moved to DC, and this is Baltimore. City I've also been to, and even more dislike Sydney. If you've ever watched The Wire, that's literally the whole of Baltimore. That's what it looks like. The capital city, always duller than hardworking, mercantile, familiar Baltimore is detestable on Sundays, dull and farcical. Nothing but an emergency would have induced her to go downtown on a Sunday. The department stores were shut. There was no obsessed crowd of women on 7th and 8th Streets in which she could hide her garments, shabby bag, untended hair, her old skin. Her poverty was naked on the empty streets, and if no one walked abroad, she felt all the more ghastly, like a wretched sinner in the sight of God. For Washington is heaven, and Henny, disfigured, burdened with shameful secrets, felt like a human being would feel on first entering the sight of angels. She detested perennial heaven, Sinai's thunder, the New Jerusalem's powerful hierarchy. She felt it was the Eden of fleshpot men and ugly women striving for God knows what ugly, unhewn, worthy ends, not for the salvation of miserable creatures like herself. When she had first come to Washington, she had come with no more sense of married life or of social life than a harem-reared woman, being then a gentle, neurotic creature wearing silk next to the skin and expecting to have a good time at White House receptions. Here she was, Collier's younger spoiled daughter, haggard, threadbare, over-rouged, worrying about how to indebt herself, going to meet a coarse fellow who was her lover merely because she could not get him into trouble. She rarely cried now, but she felt her eyes smart. Yeah, so I probably should have introduced that a bit more. So yeah, there's a move from Baltimore to Washington. She was originally from a kind of well-to-do Baltimore family, and then she marries this guy and goes into poverty, so she holds an extra resentment for that reason. And yeah, she's got, you know, lovers who she gets a little bit of money here and there for. And yeah, God. But you just see some of the ability of observation she has. And for me, you know, reading that, I think of, you know, someone on the train into Sydney or on the ferry and being very bitter. And I kind of know the scene. So yeah, The Man Who Loved Children. It's incredibly underrated, and I think it should be read by a lot of people, especially Australians. Or if not, just to Christina Stead in general, because I think she's on a slight incline that she is being recognised.
I think
a bit
I
more.
saw one of her books in a bookshop the other day. So
yeah, but I think needs more of it because she was a real opal of Australian literature.
Yeah, well, that's a great pick, and that's good because my next book is a semi-autobiographical novel as well. It's called Suttree by Cormac McCarthy. For those of you that don't know, Cormac McCarthy wrote The Road, which has been made into a film, though the book is considerably better. No Country for Old Men, Cormac McCarthy he wrote, which of course is also a film as well, which is fantastic. And then very, very good film.
And a good Yeats poem that comes from as well.
Yes, it is. What is it? What's the poem? Byzantium.
Sailing for Byzantium. Or to Byzantium.
Yeah.
But also Javier Bardem with a fucking mop on his head. Jesus.
The Coen brothers. You can't go wrong.
Tommy Lee Jones.
It's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, sort yourself out and go watch it.
Yeah. It's good.
And then Cormac McCarthy also wrote Blood Meridian, which is probably his masterpiece. But I picked Suttree because I feel like it's very unknown in his sort of canon. It's very unknown generally as well. Set in, I think it's late 40s, early 50s. It sort of documents his own life and his abandonment of his privilege that he turns away from to become a fisherman on the Tennessee River. Suttree is being compared to James Joyce's Ulysses, John Steinbeck's Cannery Row, which I've read neither of them. Have you read? I know you've read Ulysses.
I have read Cannery Row. I don't see those two as very similar books.
Well,
no, they're quite.
This is the bridge.
Slightly. I mean, you can kind of compare anything to Ulysses at some point because there's everything in Ulysses. But yeah, okay, I can see it. Maybe I can see what you're getting at. But yeah, tell me more about it, and then I'll. Yeah.
So again, sort of like Stoner, there's not major plot points. It's just sort of him chugging through life. So Suttree in the story has a family that he abandons as well, and you sort of get the sense throughout the novel that abandoning this family is the only true thing he's sort of really ever done in his life. He's this useless character, and when I was reading him, I read Crime and Punishment after, but I compared him and Raskolnikov to very similar characters in that I just wanted to grab them and shake them and say, come on, get up, do something, get on with it. But Suttree does not get on with it. It's a very Cormac McCarthy book. The prose is mythical. It's biblical. There's these glimmers of dry wit and brilliance, and really there's just this pathetic beauty about the whole kind of novel. Let's start off. I got two quotes. One sort of capturing the dry wit of the story. It's a conversation between Suttree and I think just this investigator guy. Mr. Suttree, in what year did your great uncle Geoffrey pass away? It was in 1884. Did he die by natural causes? No, sir. And what were the circumstances surrounding his death? He was taking part in a public function when the platform gave way. Our information is that he was hanged for a homicide. And so he's got this very wonderful sort of humour about it, and I mean he's joking about his uncle being hanged there, and the other person's also sort of going along with the joke as well a bit at the beginning. So that's the sort of dry humour that's just laced throughout this text. But then to one of my more favourite quotes of the book, which captures I think Cormac McCarthy's ability and style. Suttree eased himself down on the arm of the sofa and sipped his beer. He patted J-Bone on the back. The voices seemed to fade. He waved away the whiskey bottle with a smile. In the tall room, the cracked plaster soot streaked with shapes of lathes beneath this barrenness, this fellowship of the doomed, where his life pulsed obscenely fecund. In the drift of voices and the laughter and the reek of stale beer, on the Sunday loneliness seeped away. And it's this, in this particular scene, I probably should have told you before, but he's sitting in a room with some of his friends, just sort of getting drunk, as he does on most days. So he's addressing that, and I don't know how semi-autobiographical it was. I know Cormac McCarthy had quite a wealthy sort of background that he repudiated from. So he wrote this book over a 20-year period. I don't think he went to the lengths that Suttree goes to, in that he lives in a shack by the river, kind of in this life of squalor and poverty. But it's incredibly beautiful, and I think it's incredibly underrated, rightfully so, because he's up against The Road, No Country for Old Men, Blood Meridian, and these other great works that Cormac McCarthy has produced. But this one is definitely worth the read. It's probably about the same length as Christina Stead's, the one you just held up. It's very long. It's his longest book. And yeah, I couldn't recommend it more, because I don't think you've read any Cormac McCarthy. I think you've tried Blood Meridian. Is that correct?
I tried an audiobook of Blood Meridian and got into the first chapter or so, and I wasn't against it, but I think it was just the colors were off. I don't know if it was it just seemed too dark maybe, and I was listening to it
incredibly dark.
Yeah, and I'm someone who likes vivid colors, and especially in the northern winters, I don't. Yeah, I tend to
dark story.
Read, a lot of books set in the Caribbean. So, not gonna lie. Yeah. Like my other options for today was like Lorna Goodison and Olive Senior and Derek Walcott and stuff. Well, Derek Walcott's not very underrated, but yeah, but I'm not against it. I just haven't got around to it yet, and I think maybe I need maybe if I ever get a chance to return to Australia for a little period, maybe that's the book I can take as my travel reading.
Read it in the
Cormac
sun.
McCarthy.
You need the sun.
Exactly. Then I don't. Yeah. Then it doesn't become too overarching. But why do you think? What attracts you? I mean, that the prose section you read out was so, had such a Hemingway sparseness. What kind of attracts you to that style? How does he evoke it? Does it kind of is that evocative of the character? How do you feel the tone is attracts you so much in that book, or in McCarthy's style generally?
Oh, good question. I've never actually considered it. I
mean, it's a hard question to ask, because why do you love something? It's like, well, because I love it. It's a style thing. It's a style thing. But where does it take you? I guess when you're reading it,
I think it's a very fractured book, and a lot of those sentences that I read out are very short. And I think I like that. I like shorter sentences. I also like longer sentences, but I like scenes that are short and that they stop abruptly and then pick up again straight away, like this one does, and it sort of captures the fractured nature of the scene and the character, like being in your middle-aged and just surrounded by other sort of characters that are going nowhere in life in the way that these people are, and they've still got their nicknames J-Bone and stuff like that, and they're all just getting drunk like they do every other day on a Sunday. I think I just love that beauty in the way he captures characters and emotion in that particular way. I think he's incredibly stylistic. He evokes so much beauty through his prose. Blood Meridian's definitely the peak that, because that is incredibly dense but incredibly beautiful writing. That is very biblical in terms of prose, but this one I came to it unknowing, and then it was just easy to read, easy to understand, and I think I just got ferried along almost in this story, the same way that Stoner sort of carried me along. Is you just get lost and wrapped in it, and it was fantastic and easy.
Oh, great choice! Yeah, and I've never even heard of that one, so it's good. And I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know which I would start with, but I do like a book which is, I guess, quite autobiographical. Yeah. But then again, Harold Bloom, I think, said that Blood Meridian was his great modern novel.
It is.
So
it's fantastic.
But got to start somewhere. Maybe I think you once advised me to start with The Road.
I think that's his simplest of the three. Of all of them. There's much more than three. Many more than three. Yeah. I'd start with The Road. That's a great gateway, I think, into Cormac McCarthy. You don't want to go... I don't think you want to start with Blood Meridian. I think that's probably a bit too dense to be thrown into the McCarthy world.
Yeah. You want to get kissed before you get fucked.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You've got to work your way into love. You don't want to just, marry someone out of nowhere. Yeah. It's not... literature is not an arranged marriage, No. So you have a choice.
Yep.
All right, good choice. Well, on to my second choice, and I was kind of picking between a few different things, and then I thought I'm just going to pick something real simple. This is an easy one. I am always surprised that this writer and this book is not better known just because of its accessibility and what it is. It is Ambrose Bierce's The Devil's Dictionary. Do you know this book?
No, I've never even seen it. He's just holding it up for me, and it's
got a little Lucifer on the front.
I've never seen it in my life. I've never even heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. See, I don't know why.
Shoot,
it's a great
tell
book.
Tell me all.
Ambrose Bierce, again, an underrated writer. He is kind of amongst two great lights of American satire in the 19th century, Mark Twain and Ambrose Bierce. Mark Twain, far more famous, far more remembered, I think mostly because these books are more controversial. Huck Finn. He also wrote kind of more expansive popular books. He wrote a big book on Joan of Arc, and he wrote Innocents Abroad and things like that, where Ambrose Bierce was a journalist. And he was a journalist in the West Coast, which might have also had something to do with it. I think he was kind of famous initially for being part of or covering a big train strike or something in San Francisco. My memory's not good. He's also probably most famous for two other things, not The Devil's Dictionary, which is a short story called An Occurrence at Our Bridge, which is often referred to as the Great American Short Story. That's a very good short story. And then also his Final Words, which is that in the early 20th century, he went to Mexico to cover Pancho Villa's Revolucion, and his last letter when he was going out to find Pancho Villa's army, he wrote was, "I am going out now, I do not know where." And he was never heard from again.
Damn.
Where did he go? Did he die? Did he go to Cuba? Who knows? No one knows what happened. Just kind of poof, disappeared. If people remember, there's also some famous last words attributed to Pancho Villa, which is when they were riding into some town and he got shot off his horse into like a market stall, and he's dying there on the ground, and some of his men come up to him and they're like, Pancho, Pancho, and he's dying, and he goes, tell them I said something, and then he died. Probably apocryphal, but still good last line. Tell them I said something. I think there was another famous American Union general who was sitting atop his horse, and they were getting fired upon by artillery, and all these men are ducking for cover. And he said, "What are you running away for? They couldn't hit an elephant at this dist."
Oh, damn, yeah.
Head off.
Go on. See you later.
Anyway, so The Devil's Dictionary is very simply a satirical... I think it's also called the Cynic's Word Book or something like that. Satirical dictionary. So it's just got words and Ambrose Bierce's little witty satirical definitions of them.
That's kind of
and
fun.
they're hilarious. So I'm just going to read some out, so you don't need to say much else about it. Some of my favourite ones. Let's start with Australia. Australia, noun. A country lying in the South Sea whose industrial and commercial development has been unspeakably retarded by an unfortunate dispute among geographers as to whether it is a continent or an island.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. This is good.
Yeah, it's very cynical. Admiration, noun. Our polite recognition of another's resemblance to ourselves. Applause, noun. The echo of a platitude.
Ooh.
Oh yeah, he's got some really good ones. It's also mixed with, sometimes he adds little anecdotes, sometimes he writes little poems. So this one has a little anecdote from a sea captain. It's called Exile. The entry is exile, noun. One who serves his country by residing abroad, yet is not an ambassador. An English sea captain, being asked if he had read The Exile of Erin, replied, "No, sir, but I should like to anchor on it." Years afterward, when he was hanged as a pirate after a career of unparalleled atrocities, the following memorandum was found in the ship's log that he had kept at the time of his reply. August 3rd, 1842. Made a joke on the ex-Isle of Erin. Coldly received. War with the world. You might like this one. Meander. To proceed sinuously and aimlessly. The word is the ancient name of a river about 150 miles south of Troy, which turned and twisted in an effort to get out of hearing when the Greeks and Trojans boasted of their prowess.
Oh, I do like it.
Mm-hmm. Here, what do we got here? Corporation. An ingenious device for obtaining individual profit without individual responsibility. Okay, two more. These are probably my favorite. Probably the most famous one, which I have heard other people reference if they have known about the Devil's Dictionary, is the entry on prayer. Mm-hmm. Prayer. To ask that the laws of the universe be annulled in behalf of a single petitioner, themselves confessedly unworthy.
Oh. Yeah.
And then this one. Hash. There is no definition for this word. Nobody knows what hash is. And yeah, that's the Devil's Dictionary.
Damn. It's a
great book.
Devil's Dictionary, yep.
Yeah, I always, loved it. It's when I was young and, more, interested in political satire and things like that. It's just fun to open. You can just open it anywhere and have a little giggle. And
have a read,
some of it's really profound. Some of it's very light and witty. Some of it, like, the admiration is the echo. What was it? Applause, the echo of a platitude. It's a wonderful line because, generally if someone says something really profound, you don't clap. You're just like, oh, like it takes a moment for you to kind of take it in,
to process it.
Yeah. So there's some really brilliant stuff like that. And he was a great American satirist. He had a beautiful moustache, and possibly still alive. We don't know because he disappeared in 1912. We never heard from him again. But yeah, underrated. Poor old Ambrose Bierce.
Very underrated. Yeah.
The Devil's Dictionary, or
brilliant.
As I'll probably do in a short story soon, The Occurrence at Owl Creek. Also, two of his claims to fame. Worth the time.
Brilliant choice.
All right. So, Seamus, what are you reading this week?
Well, I thought I'd actually talk about the book I was reading last week, Northanger Abbey, because I was so early into it that I couldn't really do it justice. And now that I've read it, I wish I hadn't because, it was below average.
Did it have the cricket reference I mentioned?
I didn't notice it, actually.
Oh, I guess not. I don't know where I pulled that fact from.
Did it? No, not that I can remember. Nothing stuck out of me.
Austen book. I don't know. Anyway,
but it was just terrible. Like, it's called Northanger Abbey. That's the name of the house they go to eventually, but Northanger Abbey isn't mentioned until the 110th page, I think, of a book that's only 230 pages. They get to the Abbey at page 150, and then they leave again quite soon after that. But I disliked it. I mean, it was not what I was expecting. I was led astray by the blurb. The blurb sort of set it out that it was going to be this sort of exploration as the main character descends into this sort of madness while she's at the Abbey. But when I got to page 100 and the Abbey hadn't even been mentioned yet, I was like, this is getting bad, because it's not this overarching theme throughout the whole book. It's just sort of placed as this, come to the Abbey, oh yep, let's go, and then page 150 they're there, and like I say, 230 pages long, and they're only getting to the Abbey at page 150. No. Waste of time. Don't bother going to the Abbey. Don't bother reading the book. She has much better out there.
Okay, Northanger Abbey, not her best.
Disliked it.
Yes, well, good. That saves me time. Thanks.
Yep,
I haven't read that,
right.
so
Happy to help.
I mean, I would have investigated at some point just to find out if my cricket fact was actually true, but apparently
I'm going to go back and check that now.
Even that is not great. What I'm reading this week is called In Light of India by Octavio Paz. Have you read this or know
No.
this? Octavio Paz. Do you know Octavio Paz? A Mexican poet. He won the Nobel Prize at some point, probably in the 80s or 90s. I don't remember. I started reading Octavio Paz when I started learning Spanish. There's lots of great poems about stones and trees and things. And
Yep.
he also has a wonderful book about poetry called The Other Voice, La Otra Voz, which I also have here, which I love. He also, it was when I first kind of encountered this real Miltonian idea of Lucifer and Satan, i.e. the Devil's Dictionary,
The Devil's
being
Dictionary.
being the angel of freedom. Lucifer, that's what light bearer, kind of real Promethean idea in Christianity is the devil. And not when I first encountered that, but when he really explains it wonderfully and talks about Milton and some other things. Anyway, in this, he was a great poet, and he wrote some great biographies of other writers and things like that. But he was also a diplomat for Mexico in Paris and in India. Mm-hmm. And well, I thought I'd read straight from the beginning because it kind of describes.
Yeah.
He starts in Paris and then he's going to get transferred to Bombay. But I thought this was a good thing because you were talking about Rilke in a previous episode and some descriptions of Paris. So I know you like that kind of stuff. And I love the description of Paris too. I mean, Giovanni's room, whatever. But this is the very beginning of the book, and it's like I was said, it's a book about light, and I love it. He's wonderful descriptions. Octavio Paz got such a distinct style. And great attention to architecture and Indian architecture. Really liking that aspect so far. And a real kind of early kind of obsession and mixture of architecture and Indian religiosity and mixing all the myth and everything together in terms of the light and these things he's looking at and seeing. So I love it. Really great travel writing. And actually, on the boat there from Egypt in like the 50s or whatever this is, he runs into W.H. Auden's brother. So that's a weird little
Small
coincidence. World. Small world. But as Stephen Wright said, I wouldn't want to paint it. Here's just a little clip from the beginning of In Light of India. In 1951, I was living in Paris. I had a modest job at the Mexican embassy, having arrived 6 years earlier in December 1945. The mediocrity of my position perhaps explains why, after 2 or 3 years, I had not been transferred to another post, as is diplomatic custom. My superiors had forgotten me, and secretly I thanked them. I was trying to write, and most of all, I was exploring the city that is probably the most beautiful example of the genius of our civilization. Solid without heaviness, huge without gigantism, tied to the earth but with a desire for flight. A city where moderation rules the excesses of both the body and the head with the same gentle and unyielding authority. In its most auspicious moments, a square, an avenue, a group of buildings, tension turns to harmony, a pleasure for the eyes and for the mind. It goes on like that.
Yeah.
I've had some feedback from someone saying that I opened our first episode with too much quotes, so less
Dial it down. Who was that?
And Erica, if you're listening, note taken. I'm not too big for advice. You're right. I read way too much of Sea and Sardinia. But it's so good. Lawrence doesn't let you go. And neither does Paz, because it goes on like this. But he has this great dualism in his writing, you know, solid with heaviness, huge with gigantism. And I love that, you know, tied to the earth, but with a desire for flight. Paris just has this. That's a wonderful description to me. I don't know if you saw, but there's this big protest in Paris at the moment because someone's trying to build this giant glass monstrosity which looks like a piece of brie. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't seen that, no.
Look it up. It does not... I mean, the whole thing about Paris is that it's uniform. Even the catacombs match the streets. I mean, it's supposed to be uniform. That's why every time, whenever an invading army gets within 80 miles, they surrender. They're like, whatever you do, just don't bomb Paris. Just don't touch the place. It's too beautiful. We couldn't stand it. We couldn't forgive ourselves if we fought.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. It's cohesive and it's wonderful for what it is. It's a French garden in beige. And so
lovely line.
and it goes from that, and it goes to India, where he encounters all sorts of light and beauty, and I'm really loving it so far. It's not a big book; it's just a nice little snippet.
Nice.
And so that's In Light of India, Octavio Paz.
Brilliant. Thanks for listening to On the Same Page. Like and subscribe. We're on Spotify now. Hopefully, Apple Podcasts by now. Like and subscribe. Send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. We'll answer your questions live.
Surely.
Live for us.
We'll be alive.
So much, guys. Hopefully.
I'll try to be as alive as possible. I mean, it's a real struggle at the moment.
Hopefully. All right.
Do my best.
Cheers, guys. Thanks.
All right. See ya.